Hello, hello. Good evening. I am Sharrell Luckett, and I'm so happy to see you all today. I like to start off first by telling you thank you so much for coming to Teaching Terrell. We are so excited about this week. And today kicks off our celebration of the book, Terrell, Alvin, Mcraney Theater, Performance, and Collaboration. So what I want to know though is, Zoom is weird. Can you guys put in the chat like how you're feeling? You should be able to chat with everybody. Yep. Can y'all put in the chat how you feeling? Let us know how you're feeling. Come on, what we got? I'm gonna write something too. Hello, thank you, Shantae. Yes, feeling good. Hey, what's up, Jeffrey? Hi, Sajada, Troy, Kathy. Hey, Kathy, Salim. Yes, Jennifer Buckley, Tremel, Daria, Chevelle. Yep. Christian, Cole. Yeah. Oh, it's going fast. Ojala, Shanae, Laura. Hey, Laura. That's my colleague. Trevor, Frederick. What's up, Frederick? Hello, Xavier. Welcome, Sabrina. Great to see you again. Hi, Prentice. Hey, Dr. Adele. What's going on? Fantastic. Keep that energy going throughout this wonderful evening we have planned. So I will talk about the format in a second, but first I just want to introduce myself. So again, I'm Sharrell D. Luckett. I am, or Luckett. I am the director of the Helen Weinberger Center for Drama and Playwriting at the University of Cincinnati, where I also am an associate. Ooh, I almost, got tenure, y'all. Okay, and I know, yes. Thank you. Oh, it was hard, everybody. It was hard. Thank you so much. I'm an associate professor in the English department, and I also collaborate with the College Conservatory of Music. And I'm also the founding executive director of the Black Acting Method Studio, which is co-sponsoring this event, these events this week. I want to turn it over quickly to my two co-editors of the book to introduce themselves.
David, do you want to go first?
No, go ahead. You're talking. Go ahead.
All right, sure. Hi, folks, and thank you so much for being here this evening. It's so wonderful to see all of you. I'm Isaiah Matthew Wooden. I'm an assistant professor of theater arts at Brandeis University, where I teach a range of courses in the history, theory, and practice of theater. I'm also a director and the dramaturg who's worked across the United States and internationally, and I had the great pleasure of collaborating with Sharrell and David on this project.
And I'm David Roman. I'm a professor of English and American Studies at the University of Southern California, and I am thrilled to be here. And so welcome, everyone. We're delighted to have you in this space. I do want to take a moment to both shout out and thank Isaiah and Sharrell, who were beautiful collaborators, and I'm very proud to be in this book and to be a part of it. But I especially want to thank Sharrell for organizing the events starting today and for the next few days. So if you haven't seen the schedule, please quickly familiarize yourself with the beautiful set of events that Sharrell has organized for everyone, and it's all free. So Sharrell, thank you so much. This is incredible. Thank you for bringing us all together.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I have to thank you and Isaiah as well. And Isaiah also assisted me in organizing a little bit, because I certainly needed the assistance. So thank you guys for being here. All right, we're almost ready to get started. I'm just trying to pin something into the chat, and for some reason it does not want to do that. Just a couple of quick announcements, housekeeping rules. We are going to share your emails with the Black Acting Method Studio to subscribe you to the listserv. If you don't want to be on the listserv, that's fine. Shoot us an email. Otherwise, you'll get emails from us, but you can always unsubscribe as well. So don't stress out about it. And what else? We are going to drop our Instagram handles in the chat. We'd love to connect with you on social media. My Instagram is @blackactingmethods or @SDLuckett. And then we have @Silver Lake Dogs, that is Dr. Ramon's. And Isaiah can be reached on Facebook, I believe. Okay. Alrighty, cool. So Isaiah, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about the origins of the project.
All right, very good. So again, heartfelt thanks to Sharrell for organizing these events and to all of you for joining us. I just want to take a little bit of a little moment to talk some about the book and how it came to be. I will start by saying that this project has been a labor of love from the beginning. And it has multiple origin stories. And in fact, if you got me, Sharrell, and David in separate rooms and asked us how the project began, we'd probably offer slightly different versions of the story. But we would all agree that one of the really important signal moments in its development was the 2015 ATHA conference in Montreal. And we all participated on a panel that focused very specifically on Terrell's work. What was fascinating about us gathering at that particular time was that we had each arrived at that conference having developed our own unique relationship to Terrell and to his work. So by that time in 2015, both Sharrell and I had directed his plays, and he happened to come to our rehearsals to spend time with our students at our respective universities. And David had published a really wonderful essay in American Quarterly about the premiere productions of Head of Passes and Choir Boy. So we showed up having developed this unique experience, our own unique experiences and own unique relationships to the work. And we had this really rich conversation. And out of that conversation, we said, we probably should create a space to generate more conversation. And so the idea of an anthology began then and there in 2015. As life happens and as things tend to go, there was a pause for about 2 years because we each got busy with our own projects and our lives were unfolding in interesting ways. And we sort of put the project on the back burner. And then in 2017, in the wake of all of the conversation that Moonlight generated, Terrell was now part of the broader public lexicon. People were talking about the work. Wait, I'm seeing that I'm muted. Can you all hear me now?
I can hear you.
All right, sorry about that. In 2017, in the wake of the success of Moonlight and it circulating in the world and people really having an opportunity to discover and develop a deep appreciation for Terrell's, sort of singular writerly voice, we, both Sharrell and David, got in touch and said we should move this project forward. And so we began working on the project in earnest in 2017. And I just wanted to highlight very quickly some of the sort of big questions that we were thinking about as we were imagining putting together this book. And these were the questions that we used to sort of figure out what kinds of things we wanted to include in the volume. And they were, how does Mcraney's work flout theatrical convention? What are some of the interesting and unique ways that he synthesizes form and content in his dramaturgy? How does he represent and or comment on the existential and sociocultural conditions of Black life in the 21st century? What are some of the ways that he interrogates matters of race, gender, class, sexuality, and other vectors of identity in his projects? How does he take up questions of ecology and the environment? How does spirituality figure into his dramaturgy? What are those interesting intertextual connections that he stages in the plays? And then this last question connects to why we felt it was really, really important to have one of these events focus very specifically on pedagogy. What are some of the pedagogical interventions and imperatives that show up in the work, right? So that last question became a really formative question for us because in addition to thinking about the work as scholars and as practitioners, part of what we discovered is that it was so generative in our classroom spaces. I wrote an essay in 2018 about how I use Terrell's work to teach students about the very unique theatrical device that is the stage direction, right? It's a device that they oftentimes have very complicated relationships to, and Terrell's work has been really, really useful for getting them to think about the various ways that stage directions could be mobilized. So those were some of the questions that we were interested in. They were the guiding questions that we used used when we were selecting material for the volume. And I'll just conclude by saying what's sort of interesting is that this is a project that has its origins in 2015 during the age of Obama. We start to really think about it more thoughtfully and concretely in 2017. But I think that there's a way in which its arrival in 2020 is so right, because so much of Terrell's work allows us to really sort of think through this moment of crisis that we're in, right? There is a kind of urgency that both the plays and the critical work that's indexed in the volume allow us to really sort of think about in terms of the world that we're negotiating. So I feel really, really excited and lucky that the volume is out in the world at this particular time. It is a volume for these times. So I'll turn it back over to you, Sharrell.
Sure thing. Everybody knows, I believe, that we have two special guests here today, Dr. Jeffrey McCune and Dr. Freda Scott Giles. And I just wanted them to unmute for a second and introduce yourselves.
I always forget to unmute, so took me a moment. I had to remember. Thank you so much for inviting me this evening. And first, I want to thank the three editors, Sharrell, Isaiah, and David, for a wonderful volume and for allowing me to be part of it. I've known Dr. Luckett since she was an undergraduate at University of Georgia. I am Associate Professor Emerita. I retired from University of Georgia in 2014, but was there for nearly 20 years. Jointly appointed in the Department of Theater and Film Studies and the Institute for African American Studies. So I taught across those disciplines. And I think that's a basic introduction of my professional life. I taught primarily theater history, but also directing for the stage, script analysis. I was kind of, they would plug me in wherever there was a place they needed somebody to teach that semester. So an eclectic life, and directed plays.
It's so great to be on the panel with you, Dr. Freda. And I'm Jeffrey McCune. I'm an associate professor of African American Studies and Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at Washington University in St. Louis. And I am just honored to be on the panel with us, with both David and Dr. Freda, but also just so proud and so elated opportunity to just be a part of this really generous work that Sharrell, Isaiah, and David gave us in this anthology. And I have always been a lover of performance and theater, performer and playwright myself. In a way, I say in a way because I feel like academia has taken me to other heights now, even some administrative, as I leave from Washington University to go to be the director of the Frederick Douglass Institute at the University of Rochester, where I will be doing some performance stuff. So I'm excited about that, getting back into the groove. But I just wanted to say that Mcraney's work has just been so influential to me, particularly as I think about the politics of sexual discretion or masculinity and performance broadly. Really thinking about what performance studies has offered the Academy. There's a way in which Terrell really becomes an instrumental force in the field of performance studies from which I come. And so I'm just really grateful for this opportunity to have this conversation.
Thank you. We're so happy that you all are here. All right, we're gonna, I'm gonna share my screen, and we have a little short PowerPoint. We're gonna talk to you guys. I'm gonna talk about the flow of the evening. And so let me share my screen. Hold on. Cool. Dr. McCune, can you see that? You can see my screen? Okay, I have to ask because I can't, yeah, tell what everybody can see. So again, welcome to Teaching the Book, teaching Terrell, Alvin, Mcraney. I am going to, there we go. Okay, that is a picture of a photo of the book, a beautiful photo, beautiful cover. We're very pleased with the cover. So we're going to do a brief book overview, and then we have guest speakers who have chapters in the book. And of course, Dr. David Roman is also a co-editor, and that's the order they're going to speak in. Then we're going to open it up for an audience Q&A. So feel free, we're going to turn the chat off, but as we kind of start winding down, I'm going to turn the chat back on. So take notes. If you have questions you want to ask, take notes. And then when I turn the chat back on, you can drop all of your questions in there and we'll answer as many questions as we want. And we want you guys to be able to unmute yourself and talk to us. So hopefully we'll get there. Really fast, just because of bandwidth, if you could turn your camera off, that would be amazing, and make sure that you stay muted. And like I said, drop questions in the chat once I open it back up. So here we go. This is an organization of the book to kind of talk about how we put it together. Isaiah Wooden there's a fantastic introduction that really grounds the work in exactly what Terrell Alvin Mcraney is about. Right before the introduction, there is a career chronology. And, you know, one thing that's interesting about Terrell is that he's so prolific. I think he just turned 40, and he's able to have a career chronology already. Some folks get that, you know, when they're like 70 and 80, but it is so much information. And as you see, this is not the entire chronology. You can see some years are missing, but as you see, we try to give you like what was going on in his life and then his honors and awards. And this is really instructive, I feel like, for students and professors, because a lot of times they want to know, how did Terrell get from point A to point Z? You know, or how did this person structure their career? This is a fantastic roadmap. And you see, it seems like he blew up in like 2 years, but you see that he's actually put in a lot of work, been a lot of places, and also has a lot of accolades. And what we are pleased about the career chronology is that we were able to get all the way up to 2019. Thank you to Northwestern, the fall of 2019. So we were actually able to even include David Makes Man, which we know has been renewed for a second season on OWN and HBO Max. So we're super excited about that. So this is the chronology, and that's in the book.
All right. So I'm just going to talk very, very quickly and briefly about how the book is organized, so that if there are those of you out there who are trying to figure out how to go about teaching it and trying to figure out where you might find resources in your classroom, this is to offer you a little window into our own organizing logic. So it's organized, the book is organized into 3 parts. And part 1 is called Space, Faith, and Touch. And part 1 primarily focuses on the plays that are not the brother-sister plays. So we start off with a chapter by Donette Francis, who I think is in the room. Donette, if you are in the room and if you are okay to come on camera, please feel free to unmute, show your video, and say hey. All right, maybe Donette is not in the room. So we start off with her, where she sort of introduces the idea of what she calls Terrell's Black Southern Hemispheric epics. And she talks very specifically about Head of Passes, Moonlight, and touches on the brother-sister plays. Then we have Patrick Maley, who's sort of thinking about questions of religiosity, and his case studies are Head of Passes and Choir Boy. We move to David's chapter, which again is about Head of Passes and Choir Boy. Then Brian Keith Alexander offers a very close read of Wig Out, one of Terrell's earlier plays that isn't produced as often as some of the other work, but in recent years, there's been a renewed interest in it. And then Kathy Nye's chapter on The Breach. Kathy, I think, is also in the room. Kathy, do you want to unmute and stop, show your video and say hello?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I can't see myself, so I hope I look good. Hey, y'all. So excited to be here.
All right, very good, very nice. And so thank you so much, Kathy. The Breach is one of Terrell's earliest plays, and it was co-written with two other playwrights, Joe Sutton and Katrine Fallou, and it was written in the wake of the devastation of Hurricane Katrina. So we were very excited to have a chapter about this play that not a lot of people have read or know about. And then the section concludes with a really beautifully intertextual piece on the film Moonlight by I. Augustus Durham. And then we transition to part 2, which is titled Brothers, Sisters, and the Gods Among Us. And those chapters focus very specifically on the brother-sister plays, Mcraney's triptych that takes place in the fictional town of Saint-Père. And some of the chapters look at the trilogy holistically, and some of them focus on very specific plays. So Joshan Alvarez starts us off with a chapter that looks at Marcus or the Secret of Sweet. And then Professor Giles has a chapter that looks at the trilogy more holistically and then places it within a longer genealogy. And she's going to talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. Then we have Sarika Dix-Colbert with a chapter on In the Red and Brown Water. Omi Osun Joniel Jones again offers us a more holistic interrogation of the trilogy. And then we conclude the section, with a chapter by Dr. McCune about the brother Size in particular, and he's going to talk about that in a second. And then the third part of the chapter, I'm going to turn it over to Sharrell to talk about because she was the primary editor of that section. But I'll just say very quickly that we were very invested in ensuring that we had a broad range of voices included in the book, and we thought it was very important that the book highlight some of Terrell's collaborators. And so part 3 really focuses on him as a collaborator, and we had the opportunity to interview him. So part 4 concludes with a brief interview where you really do get an opportunity to see the sort of the distinctiveness of his theatrical imagination. So Sharrell, I'll turn it back over to you.
Sure thing, thank you. Backstage Pass was so fun to put together. Just the type of support that we received from these heavy hitters is just amazing. And as you look at their names, I'm assuming that you can recognize many of them in the work that they do in the field of theater and TV and film. What I did want to talk about briefly in Backstage Pass is there's also a special section where Tina Landau provides her director's notes for just doing Terrell's plays in general, directing them in general, and then also for Wig Out. And she provides her opening notes for the brother-sister plays. So it's a really cool roadmap, and it's also really really good to get inside Tina's head because she has been ushering along a lot of Terrell's plays, world premieres for a very long time. And then we also have an interview with Michael Boyd, the former artistic director of the Royal Shakespeare Company. So he talks a little about Terrell's work with Shakespeare with that company. And then what was really cool is we were able to get an interview with the music supervisor from David Makes Man. So how does he layer music and choose music for the show? We found out it was really complex, but he was happy to do that as well. And then after that, there's a small interview with Terrell Alvin Mcraney in his own words, where Terrell just kind of riffs on his life and everything, and we asked him questions. So that is part 3, art creation and collaboration, where it was really important for us to merge, as Isaiah said, the academic, the academy with the practitioners outside of the academy, because that is one thing about Terrell's work that I don't think you can say about all playwrights, is that it transcended outside of the stage, and it's on TV and film now and on Broadway as well. So it was important to talk to those people about his work because it's not insular. So yeah. And just really briefly, I'm going to stop my screen share, but I know you guys know this, but we're going to tell you guys again is that Northwestern agreed to offer everybody a special discount code. So the code is Mcraney, pretty easy to remember, 30% off. You have to purchase from the Northwestern University Press. Don't go to Amazon because it's not, you know, it's on, the book is on Amazon, but the 30% off is from Northwestern University Press. And now I'm going to stop my screen share. And I'm going to stop my PowerPoint as well. Cool. And we are going to move into the guest speakers, starting with David Roman to talk a little bit about his chapter. Each speaker will talk for about 10 minutes about their chapter, and then we'll move into that Q&A. Oh, you have to unmute, David. Let me see if I can help you. Yep.
There we go. We've all been asked to address 4 different things, and one of them first was how we first learned of Terrell's work and our relationship to the work, and then talk about some key issues, key themes, and then select a key scene or so. So I'll try to follow that format, but I'll be very casual about this. I first was introduced to Terrell through the Steppenwolf Theater. I write books on American theater, and one of the things I try to do in my work is to really sample different productions across the country and not just focus in one region. I live in Los Angeles, and I used to live in New York, and I try to make sure that I see productions in different pockets of the country. And one of the theaters that I was following pretty consistently, because I used to live in Chicago after graduate school, was the Steppenwolf Theater. And the Steppenwolf Theater is one of the premier regional theaters in the country, based in Chicago, founded years ago, and is an ensemble theater, which is, again, is also kind of unusual. And Tina Landau, who Sharrell had talked about a little bit just a moment ago, is an ensemble member, and I've been following her work. I think she's one of the most interesting theater directors on the scene. And she very early on developed a relationship with Terrell as an actor, but then as they both progressed as artists, they became collaborators when he started writing plays. So I first saw a production of the brother-sister plays at Steppenwolf, and I was pretty much hooked in to Terrell's world then. And then I saw Wig Out at the Vineyard Theater in New York, maybe a year or so later. And I've been following Terrell's career pretty closely since then. And I decided to write my chapter. Initially, it was for American Quarter, Journal for the American Studies Association. I'm not a theater professor, I'm an English professor and an American Studies professor. So I teach courses on American literature and American culture, and rarely am I able to teach a course on theater history because I'm not in a theater department. So I wanted to write an essay that introduced Terrell to non-theater people, because I think Terrell was beginning to have a lot of buzz in the theater world, both in terms of the regional theaters were paying attention to this like hot new playwright, and then scholars were beginning to pay attention to his work as well. But I think people outside of the theater still seemed fairly naive and ignorant about the emergence of this new voice in American culture. So my essay was designed to outreach to people outside of the theater world. So in that, I wanted to introduce Terrell and place him, and this is how I would teach the work too, is that the first question, I think of myself as a historian, like a theater historian or a historian of culture or literature. So one of the things that I was really drawn to when I was first introduced to Terrell's work is like, how do we place him in American theater history? Or more particularly, how do we place him in African-American or Black theater history? And I was really struck by the innovations that Terrell was introducing, and especially in the wake of the death of August Wilson. And in the essay that I wrote, in my chapter, I make a claim for a kind of African-American theater renaissance happening right around in the wake of August Wilson's death, with figures like Lynn Nottage, Susan Laurie Parks, Katori Hall, Dominique Morisseau, a bunch of Thomas Bradshaw, a bunch of artists who were kind of jumping onto the scene and writing about Black life. So one of the things I'm first interested in is placing Terrell within a genealogy of theater history. And I think that's important because it's important to see what the influences are and then what kind of the roots and ramifications, where does he come from and what space is he creating for future generations. And I would even say, although don't say it's his essay because I wrote it a while ago, is that Terrell has already had tremendous influence for a new generation of writers. I mean, there's a cohort that I think he's identified with, but I think there's even a new group of young emerging playwrights who would be deeply influenced by Terrell's work. So I would first address the historical dimensions of his achievement and his contribution and place in American theater. Then the second thing that I like thinking about is, although we generally identify this as a thematic, I kind of think of what are the representational interventions. And I think what I was struck when I was first seeing Terrell's work was that I was seeing things that I'd never seen before, right? It wasn't just that there was a new talented playwright on the scene, but the themes that he was introducing, the characters that he was introducing, the stories that he were telling were things that I had never seen before, and that were, if I had seen it all, were really underrepresented if on American theater stages. So I was struck by not simply the quality of the work, but the political intervention of the representation itself. Stories that were often marginalized or characters that might be secondary characters were now the main story of the play itself. So I really give Terrell lots of credit for shifting the representational politics of American theater to include the fullness of Black life, what we generally associate as being the primary contribution of August Wilson, especially in the 10-decade project that he did before his death. And I think that Terrell picks up on that and continues to really explore the fullness of Black life in his plays. But one thing that I think would be different, that would differentiate him from August Wilson, would be that unlike Wilson, who follows a particular aesthetic structure in all of his plays, and I know there's variants, of course, but he's pretty much invested in the realist form. What I find really striking and most impressed by Terrell's achievement is that each play has its own formal structure. So I think it's really a challenge to write about and to think about what are Terrell's aesthetics, because the analogy that I would make and I make with my students is that it would be as if like you're walking down the street and you're looking at the architecture in the neighborhood, and the architecture might all be by the same design, architect, but each house looks different. So in the same way that all of Terrell's plays, of course, are definitely written by him, but each play looks different, and each play establishes a structure that's specific for the themes, the content, and the representation of the play itself. So that relationship between form and structure, the aesthetics of the play, I think are also central in thinking about that. And in Head of Passes and Inquire Boy, the two plays that I write about in my chapter, I think that that's really striking, that it's almost impossible to kind of collapse the two structures into one aesthetic. They're really completely different projects that, and I find this achievement really so impressed that he's able to provide a structure for the story of the play that actually enhances the story itself. And then the final thing that I like to think about in terms of history, representation, aesthetics being a third, and the fourth would be kind of the materiality of the plays, right? The politics of the play, the ideology of the play. And I think that it really needs to be stated that one of the achievements, again, like Wilson, like Susan Laurie Parks, like Lynn Nottage, especially that they're being produced in the regional theaters across the country, is that provide a tremendous opportunity for Black talent to take over the American stage, whether it's directors, designers, or actors. And I think it's really important to not underplay the opportunities that Terrell's work provides for a whole set of artists to participate in the creation of these works. So the historical, the representational, the aesthetic, and the material are the entry points for me in thinking about the work. Sharrell asked each of the three of us that are speaking to select a key scene from our chapter and one of the plays that we're talking about to kind of highlight all of this. So I'm going to just quickly walk you through a scene in Choir Boy, which actually is the only play of Terrell's to make it to Broadway. It premiered on Broadway, I guess, the December, January 2019 season. But it originally was at Manhattan Theater Club's smaller theater. I think it was 2013. And one of the things I find really interesting about that play is that it follows, well, first, the structure of the play is episodic. The play starts at a commencement at an all-boys prep school, an all-boys prep school called the Drew Academy. And we're at a commencement ceremony where one of the young boys, he's a teenager, is singing the commencements of the school song. And he's heckled by one of the other people in the choir. Like there's a homophobic kind of slurring that happens that he hears. No one else hears it, but he hears it. And then he pauses. And then the headmaster kind of is thrown by this because he feels that the young man kind of wasn't fully professional. And that kind of sets the stage for what happens. And the play then proceeds with episodes in the following year of this student. His name's Pharrell, and he's played by Jeremy Pope, who was nominated for a Tony Award for his performance. But interspersed throughout these scenes are moments where the ensemble sing traditional Negro spirituals. And I think it's really interesting to see how the structure of the play is, and some might even say it's Brechtian in that it's episodic. Each episode can stand in for itself and has its own kind of logic and aesthetic. But the songs themselves comment on the action that we have just seen. So the structure of the play is both episodic, like maybe like 8 episodes in the year of these young men, interspersed with musical interludes that the cast then performs. The one that I want to highlight, and I'm actually going to read you just quickly the section of it. There's a moment in the play where our protagonist, who has been, put to the test, he's really been tested in terms of how much he can take in terms of the bullying that he experiences. And he shares a room with AJ, who is an athlete, who's a straight boy, who is incredibly compassionate and sympathetic to Pharrell's experience. So they're roommates, and their commencement is the next day, and AJ then decides to cut the other one's hair to groom him for the commencement. So here we go. By the end of the play, Ferris finds support in his friendship with his straight athlete roommate, AJ. It is AJ who is most concerned with Ferris's defeated disposition. And in a scene as tender as any I have seen on stage, it is AJ who reaches out to Ferris and provides him affection and love. A full year has passed since the play's first scene. The distant present that opened the play is now even more removed. Much has transpired during the past school year, and now, on the eve of the commencement, the two roommates secure their bond even more. So one of the things I'm also drawn to is how Terrell forges intimacy and friendship among people in his plays. AJ, the embodiment of Black masculine heteronormativity, offers to groom Ferris for the upcoming graduation ceremony. Ferris opens up again, confiding in AJ his vulnerability and the social ostracization he has experienced as a Black gay youth by other African-American males, not just at the school, but previous to the school, and in particular at a barbershop that he would go to as a child. AJ recognizes the lateness of the hour and his roommate's loneliness and invites Ferris to sleep beside him in his bed. They have 2 separate beds, and in this case, AJ invites him to just share the bed with him. The scene, while homoerotic, remains platonic. It's not sexual by any means. AJ, a Drew man if there ever was one, is confident in his sexual identity and his enduring friendship with Ferris. I think the point here is that Terrell is trying to highlight the friendship, the alliances, the possibilities of intimacy across difference. The sweetness of the scene is endorsed by the cast, who immediately take the stage to sing an old Negro work song, Rainbow Round My Shoulder, which embodies the collective energy of the group to stand in for each other during times of duress. So I think it's, for me, really moving and powerful that what we see on stage, the scene between Ferris and AJ, the friendship, then is given communal support by the actual actors, some who have actually been the characters who have bullied the Jeremy Pope character. So we see how the aesthetic choices in terms of the structure of the play, the episodic play interspersed with song, then comment and have an interrelated dynamic that really gives the play its fullness. I am going to stop there and be happy to address this more as we move into the discussion section.
Thank you. Dr. Freda, you're up next. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you. I have to always remember to unmute and to put my camera on. But thank you. I was very interested in the questions that David had raised. How do we place Terrell Alvin Mcraney in American theater history? How do we place him in African-American theater history? And how he said in Mcraney's work, he had seen things he had not seen before in American theater. And that led me to think about my introduction to Terrell Alvin Mcraney, which was in 2008. I got to go to the Alliance Theater to see In the Red and Brown Water, directed by Tina Landau. And I was captivated from the first moments, not only by what he was doing, but how she had staged the play. And so I was just bowled over. I had known the story from teaching other things. I knew the story of Oya and the love triangle with Shango and Ogun. These are all Yoruba deities. And I knew Legba and the deities that are part of this, this trilogy, and how he had conflated these deities into human form, human beings living in this marginalized community, and who loved greatly, who suffered greatly, who lived these lives. And I just had to have more. So I started researching online. I started trying to find out more about this playwright. It took me a couple of years, but I got to see the rest of the trilogy. And I got to see at the National Black Theater Festival, I got to see the Brothers Size. And then in that theater in the King Plow Arts Center in Atlanta, trying to remember the name of the theater, but that's where I saw Marcus or The Secret of Sweet. And they were all just outstanding experiences in the theater. So, I looked for more information, and it also sent me back. I'm a bit older than you guys. I hope I'm not old enough to be your grandmother, but I probably am. But so it went back to back in the early 70s when I saw a production of Shango de Ima, and also in 72, I think, is when Paul Carter Harrison published the drama of Nomo, talking about a new paradigm for African-American theater, the rejection of realism. We don't need realism. We need something larger, something more mythic. And Mcraney provided all of that. We were looking at something bigger. And his conflation with the characters of Yoruba deities, and then the addition of Lorca's Yerma, and the whole issue there of in African society, you know, it's very important to have children, and so and Yerma, she was barren. Yerma means barren. She was desperate for children, and there are a lot of scenes, not a lot of scenes, but several places in the play that speak directly to Yerma. And so we had this classical Greek tragedy, we had modern tragedy, we had Yoruba tragedy, Shakespearean tragedy. It was all there. So I was like on a high when I left the theater for In the Red and Brown Water. I told everybody, you got to see this show. But since my main teaching area is theater history, I wanted to link Mcraney's brother-sister plays to this line of thinking of making this connection to the Afrocentricity of the performance and the way the play was put together, and the way it used the Yoruba deities in the play. So, so in my essay, I talk about Shango de Ima by Pepe Carril a little bit. I go to Paul Carter Harrison's play, The Great Mac Daddy, which was based on The Palm Wine Drinker, which was a novel by Amos Tutuola that was sort of an introduction for many people into African novels. The Great Mac Daddy was not nearly as successful in trying to do the things that Terrell, Alvin, Mcraney did, but it was a precursor in a way. And also that Mcraney's place, especially in The Red and Brown Water, talked directly to a couple of August Wilson plays, Joe Turner's Come and Gone, and my favorite August Wilson play, Gem of the Ocean. So, and it was interesting in reading about Mcraney that at the end of Wilson's life, Mcraney was at Yale, and he did get to work a little bit on Wilson's last plays. Radio Golf, I think he worked a little on. I read this in one of the articles. But anyway, I wanted to draw a line on a continuum. And that's what I try to do with the connection to Yoruba cosmology. And the idea, even if the audience had read the program notes, which does mention this cosmology, they might not be aware of the brilliant way that Mcraney incorporated and infused it. So, so I would like to I had copied a quote that I wanted to, it's on page 194 of the book. I thought this summed it up. Surely Jo Finney said it better than I. She said, Mcraney's style is poetic and rich in the ancestral elements of drum, dance, and song that evoke spirit, so that the witness is forced to reckon with a visceral spiritual experience that is familiar, an experience that transcends the straightforward Western storytelling into African-American myth. And this is what I wanted to look at and kind of trace. So the section of my essay that I wanted to share has to do with a scene in The Red and Brown Water. I found a quote by Mcraney, and he said, Mcraney decided to put this historical, cultural, literary intertextuality into a contemporary African-American context. The tradition, quote, the tradition of keeping those stories alive and using them to tell stories about African Americans in the most urban and quotidian way is nothing new. We call it sampling in hip hop. So I was interested in keeping the tradition in the theater, merging the old with the new, and listening to the discourse it created in the space. So that's where I got the title of Hip Hop Nomo, from the drama of Nomo by Paul Carter Harrison, where he talks about the elements of African-American drama that make it a particularly Afrocentric experience, which Shirley Jo Finney aptly described, and the idea of sampling, and the idea of intertextuality. That you know that in hip hop, there's a lot of the texts speak to other texts, and he does that. So, so I talk about the space that Mcraney created for Oya's story, which is, as I said, the love triangle between Oya, Shango, and Ogun. So he places it in a place called Saint-Père, Louisiana, which is St. Peter is the cover saint, if you know Santeria, the cover saint for Ogun. So, so there's so many resonances here. I can't even go into them all. He talks about time, and I think David talked a little bit how it's not Western time in this play. And of course, there's the image of the water. But I'm going to, I don't know how my time is, and I don't know how long I've talked, so I just want to get to this scene.
Yes, you have time.
Huh?
You have time. You got about, yeah, you have time.
Okay, great, thanks. Early in the play, Alegba, who's a mischievous boy, and Mcraney says Legba's time is different from everybody else's time. He grows up faster. He moves faster through time than the other characters. But we see him as an adolescent boy who is talking to Mama Moja, Yemoya, who's the mother of Oya, and he has a dream. And Legba says, "It's always about the water, my dreams, near it or around it. Sometimes I stand in the high tide and I can't breathe, but I can breathe. And I walk on the bottom of the waters, and they see people walk alongside me, but they all bones, and they click the bone people. They talk in the click. I say, where y'all going? And they say, just walking for a while. I say, don't you want to go home? They say, when we walked there, it wasn't there no more. I feel bad for them. Then they click and I come up on the mud part, like they send me to the land part. And I'm sitting there waiting because I know they want me to wait. I wait there looking on and on top of the waters is Oya. Lil Legba looks for Moja's reaction. That's him speaking a stage direction. But that whole thing about the bones, that's a direct, to me, speaking to August Wilson's City of Bones, and the bones that are described in both the Joe Turner's Come and Gone and Gem of the Ocean. In August Wilson's City of Bones, which is connected to, these are the people who died during the Middle Passage. So they're neither in America or Africa. The City of Bones is beneath the sea. And in Gem of the Ocean, that's how Citizen, the main character, is healed, by going to the City of Bones with the help of Black Mary. But in this, it's sort of an ambivalent relationship that Legba has with these Bones people. In August Wilson's play, the Bones people in Joe Turner come up out of the water and take on flesh. But here, they say, don't you want to go home? They say, when we walked there, it wasn't there no more. Well, what does he mean by home? Does he mean going back to Africa? Or does he mean going to America? But wherever home is, it's not there. So Legba's waiting, the Bones are waiting. There's a kind of unsettled feeling about this. So, you know, what to make of these texts, but they take you into a realm of thought that is very, for me, very emotional and very deep into, you know, what is our relationship? What is our relationship with the ancestors, with where we're going, where we came from? But it deteriorates into Legba has a dream about Oja, which is pretty sexy. And, you know, Mama Moja is none too pleased by this. But we see this character, and if you know Legba, he's a trickster. He's very mercurial kind of guy. And we see him again in The Brother's Size, all grown up, and a whole nother story. But I was just struck by so much of what Mcraney was accomplishing in the space of this play. You had a great story, but that story was expanded with so many layers of history and culture and present and the past. And that's what I try to capture somewhat in tracing it from when we first talked about these things during the period of the Black Arts movement to now. We're in a period that we call postmodern, post-Afrocentric. So I hope I haven't overrun my time.
Yeah, no, you are right on time.
Thank
yes,
you.
okay, yeah. Thank you so much. We are going to save questions for Dr. Freda, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jeffrey, calling folks by their first name. Dr. Jeffrey.
I appreciate it. I like being called by my first name sometimes, you know. Sometimes we forget that we have first names. I won't preach that today. But anyway, thank you, Sharrell, for having me, and thank each of you all for being here. I don't tend to be, as David said earlier, you know, we were talking about the casual nature of the talk and presentation. I don't tend to be very casual, but I'm gonna try to be as casual as possible. And so the way I can be casual is by talking about how I first came to Mcraney. And so it was 2008, I was going to the Studio Theater, walking past the Studio Theater in Washington, DC, and I saw this beautiful image of these two unclothed Black brothers sitting right in front of me on the inside of the window of the Studio Theater. And I didn't know what play it was, but I knew that I had just moved to DC, the Chocolate City, and I had not been able in my time previously in Rochester or any other places, Northwestern in Chicago, sure, but like Nebraska and Iowa, this was not the common visual that I was hit with. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to see this play because I know that it's going to be some, muscular brothers in this play called The Brothers' Size in 2008. And when I got there, I was really struck by what was not just a visibly sexy and attractive aesthetic, but was also a very specific and peculiar arrangement of bodies in the context of The Brothers' Size. And I had never seen anything like it. There was not a stage. Literally, the bodies were singing and speaking and moving and talking to each other in ways that was not common in what I would call the kind of more traditional Black theatrical contemporary. And I've always been interested as a scholar in the ethnographic gaze of the artist, right? And so for me, I'm always interested in how is it that Black playwrights particularly do certain kinds of ethnographic work, right? Looking at culture, face value, and really exposing, right, the dynamism and difference and complexity that we see within Black life. And one of the things that I'm always disheartened by in more formal anthropology or sociology is that often the story that wants to be told is a generalizable story, right? One that kind of situates, right, to Chicago thugs, right? Chicago gangsters on the West Side, right? We're gonna do an ethnography of that and figure out the culture. But Mcraney's play, The Brothers' Size, didn't offer this. It didn't allow this. It actually gave me a much less rigid and narrow distillation and definitely a much more expansive and complex and even contradictory representation of Black men on stage. And so what I was interested in is how do we see this play challenge what I began to call canonical Black masculine narratives, right? How do we see this play as being instructive, teaching us, right, how it is that we can actually stage Black men's bodies on stage without a lot of hoopla, right? But make their bodies speak the dynamism, the multiplicity, the porousness, right, of Black masculinity. And so for me, I was really intrigued by both the audacity and skill of the actors that were chosen for this particular version. But I was just struck by the language, the text, the way in which Mcraney, in this opening scene particularly, really gave us a sight of sound, body, and movement on display. And if you remember The Brothers' Size, and if you have not seen it, I'm gonna dare to perform a little bit for those performers out here. I would dare to do a little bit of it, but a kind of invocation starts The Brothers' Size, right? It's a coming together, a meeting of people, ideas, and three very variant Black bodies. There's no set place of work given in the use of sound and symbolic gesture. All we hear over and over again is, "This road is rough," right? "This road is rough." "This road is rough," right? Like varying degrees of roughness. You get a sense that the road itself, right, is actually different for each brother. And they're just kind of moving in this space with a sort of kind of, not that I want to appropriate this, but a Black boy magic that is undergirded by the drums, right? And the drums is doing, as I think Professor Giles said earlier, is doing some really magical work and magnificent work in terms of being a kind of counterpuntal presence to these Black masculine bodies, right? And so where we might be used to, at least in this production at the Studio Theater, where we might be used to a kind of a drum set that kind of provokes a kind of more truculent masculinity, as Baldwin would say, right? We see this kind of real fluid and flexible movement right? These bodies that are agile and limber and almost moving as if they're Alvin Ailey, right? And not necessarily, deep South Side Chicago that I was used to and that I had been writing about. And so I was really, really perplexed by Mcraney's ability to really capture a kind of ethnographic richness of Black masculine bodies on the stage. And juxtaposed to this was another kind of queering, a queering of a kind of West African cosmology, right? And so we get the Yoruba, and I don't mean to say it like, I have friends who practice Yoruba deeply and really use it as a really core spiritual practice. But I think that the way in which it's instrumentalized for Mcraney is actually not formalistic, right? Even the religious, spiritual recall does not have purity, right? And there's a way in which he uses these kind of impure forms, right? To suggest to us that our rituals are never righteously pure. And actually the kind of richness of all of this, right, is that even as he names Ogun, right, supposedly a metal worker, right? But we know that Ogun, as Professor Giles just said, Professor Freda just said, that Ogun, shows up in the previous play as being soft, by my interpretation, right? But in this play, he's supposed to be hard, and he's always working with automobiles and under the car and moving in a way that represents this kind of truculence that I'm talking about. But then we have Alegba in the Brothers' Size, who is definitely early on in Mcraney's Brother Sisters plays, comes off as a kind of childlike, with a childlike innocence, right? But that childlike innocence that allowed him to kind of have so much agency in the world, and some of that has to do, I argue, with complexion, right? The way in which he moves through the world as a lighter skinned, African American or even Latinx, we'll say Creole figure, actually pushes him in some ways to kind of have a little bit more flexibility in the world. And that flexibility continues into the Brothers' Sides, right? And so then we get Ochusi, who is already a wanderer, who begins to wander with him in prison, right? They want to be in prison together, and together they actually create a very fluid dynamic that I won't call anything but a very discrete relationship that has some sexual homoerotic overtones, but I don't think can be castigated or defined as, let's say, a gay relationship or maybe even a queer relationship, but yet one that was a situational relationship, of which, of course, Alegba finds much more meaning. So for me, the play really does this thing where it queers this West African spiritual cosmology, while at the same time accentuates the queerness that always already exists, always has existed within these deities, right? And it's something really rich about just the way in which it's not pronounced that that's what Mcraney is doing, but he allows the characters to kind of move in these contradictory, messy ways that really challenge some of the narratives. I mean, even thinking back, you got me thinking about this, Professor Freda, Shango and the misreadings of Shango as always this kind of hyper titillating sexual deity, and that the only way that people read him is that all his energy comes from his growing, right? But Mcraney explodes that, right? And actually makes it a tension that there's some kind of disconnect or some kind of dystopic sensation between his growing and his heart, or his growing and his mind, right? We see this wrestle that he has with Oya in Red and Brown Water. And so in in this play, The Brothers' Size, we get Mcraney's gift for tapping into the everyday lives of Black men in his command of Black male vernacular phrases and his attention to geospatial issues that Black men face. And this is where I'm gonna get a little bit more academic, right? The most memorable moment is where he illuminates what Rashad Shabazz has called the logics that emerge from carceral mise-en-scene, which is like the carceral space, the carceral state, the prison state. In these spaces where continuity between prison and urban space is salient, men often feel as if confinement is a built-in landscape. Prior to the following scene, Ogun, Ochusi, and Alegba remarkably fill in each other's sentences as they narrate their experiences with the police. In what follows, all three men recall their encounters with the sheriff of the town. And I think this is so apropos, as Isaiah was saying earlier, for 2020, to think about the ways in which also Mcraney is also having to operate in the prophetic as he draws from these varying traditions and stories, and as he ethnographically captures so much of what is complex about Black men's life, or what sometimes is also simple about the way in which people see Black men. Alegba reads, he say, "Where you going, Legba?" Ochusi sighs, "He remember your name?" Ogun, "He called me Size. Call me Size too. Like we twins, or the same person. Like it's only one of us. Like we the same." Mcraney calls our attention to the easy way that the sheriff reduces the Size brothers to be one and the same, as if one size fits all. This representation on stage holds forth a history of police profiling within Black communities, whereby Black men are without reason too often targets of crime. Mcraney's emphasis on the one-size-fits-all formula connects to his previous illustration of how predictive policing and surveillance is within the Sizes community. This coupling, tied with Ochusi's "like we the same," not only draws our attention to the surveilling mechanisms of neighborhoods, but our own policing practices. The audience must now begin to recognize not so much how the Size brothers are alike or like us, the traditional identification questions, but how this visual image signposts and illuminates difference. Here, the Brothers' Size moves from a remark on last names to a recognition of how Black men are subjected to canonical prejudices that pigeonhole them as ready for incarceration. Mcraney disallows for such easy marks and shows us the agency found not only through Black men's awareness of carceral structures, but also the rich treasure of realizing our own discourses of containment. And I will stop there. Thank you so much for bearing with me with the little formality, and also for allowing me to talk to you a little bit about my essay, One Size Does Not Fit All.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. McCune. Yes, yes, yes. And I was excited about the performance. Yes. So I appreciate you embodying in that way. I try to get my students to do that in the classroom. You know what I mean? So thank you for that. Great, great, great. So we are at the Q&A. So thank you all for still being here and hanging out with us. Right now, if you could start dropping your questions in the chat. And I know I said I would let you unmute and talk to us too, but it's good to also put the questions in the chat so we can kind of see where you're coming from and what's going on, okay? So if you can drop those questions in the chat for us. In the meantime, while we're chatting, I just wanted to make sure I stop and thank the Helen Weinberger Center for Drama and Playwriting at the University of Cincinnati for sponsoring this week, along with the Black Acting Method Studio. I have to thank the Mercantile Library in Cincinnati as well. And I wanted to also too, because I know some people might not be able to stay the whole time, I wanted to make sure you guys know that we have two more phenomenal events coming up. One is tomorrow, which features Dr. Jonathan Matthias Lassiter, and you do not want to miss that. He is brilliant. When I first met him and started talking to him, I was like, you are the little James Baldwin. You know, I mean, he just comes at stuff from Black psychology. He specializes in LGBT Black health. He's just absolutely terrific. And so I hope that you guys can experience that. He's going to talk about mental health, Moonlight, and Mcraney, and connect those dots for us. And then on Thursday, we got the Queen. It's a bunch of people on Thursday. But y'all know I grew up on Felicia Rashad at the Cosby Show. So the Queen has agreed to come and talk to Isaiah and me. And also Tina Landau is gonna be there on Thursday, and so is Alana Arenas. So these are some heavy hitters. And that event is almost full. We got to cap it. You know, everybody can't be in the room. We got to cap it. So if you're interested in coming to the event tomorrow and Thursday, please sign up after. I see that you guys are dropping questions in the chat. I think, okay, Corey, I see you, Corey. So if you have questions, drop them in the chat, and then we're going to get started with the Q&A. Thank you again, David, Freda, and Jeffrey. So I see one question from Corey. Is it just me who sees one question?
I see the question, and Sharrell, I'm going to actually pose the question so that you can answer it. Does that sound good?
You gonna let me pose it?
I'm going to pose it so that you can answer it, because it really is sort of about Black acting methods. And say it again.
I was trying.
I'm going to read it out.
No, go ahead.
I'm going to read it out. And Corey, if you can, if you want to chime in and sort of elaborate, but I'm going to read the question. And it's, so Corey teaches your work. He learned about the book through your work, Sharrell. And his question is really about, you know, thinking about this book and thinking about Black acting methods. Do we have advice for students who may be looking to use these books without the guidance of a professor? Are there any ties between the two books that you think would be helpful for keeping them in mind?
Oh, wow. Okay. Thank you, Corey. Great question. I can tell you what came up for me because I just got this question right now. Your last piece, the ties, certainly spirituality, Black acting methods, a commonality in Black acting methods deal with spirituality and Black culture and how it's rooted in spirituality. So Terrell Alvin Mcraney, we know, like everybody has said, his work is expansive. It's a lot of that in his work. So those are definitely some connections with what we talk about in Black acting methods. What advice do you have for students who may be looking to use the book without the guidance of a professor? I might need a little bit more information. Who may be the book without the guidance of you laughing? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Corey, can you talk to us? What do you help me out? Because I'm like, well.
Yeah. So I am the president of the Black Undergraduate Theater Collective at FAU, which is Florida Atlantic University, and which is an hour away from Gable Stage and all the theaters where Terrell Alvin Mcraney's plays were like being produced. It's a very white school. They're not kind to us, and we kind of formed our organization as a rebuttal to the fact that we were not receiving a well-rounded education that included Blackness or even alluded to the fact that they had Black students. So we were looking in spring to start basically using your book, Black acting methods, and using Terrell Alvin Mcraney's text and the teaching Terrell Alvin Mcraney book kind of all together, and we were just all going to read it and figure it out ourselves and kind of explore and see what happens, because we don't have anyone on our faculty who is willing or able to do so. So I just wanted any kind of advice that you could offer as far as like going in with just the book and not really having a master's degree or like that extra, I guess, just knowledge. I was blessed enough to see the final weekend of Choir Boy on Broadway. So I kind of have that. I have like seeing his work done, and I have being in the same community as people who have met him, but also not having access to those people. And then I have the books rented off of Amazon. So
yeah, and I think some of my co-editors and folks can answer this too. I think, thank you for your question first, Corey. Terrell writes for you guys. right? That's the first thing. I don't think you need, you know, in terms of who can come in and help you. Folks can come in and help you, but like you know, maybe you don't have a master's, but there are people with masters that can't help you. You understand what I'm saying? So he is writing for you all, right? And his plays are a wonderful roadmap. What I can suggest, if you're linking the two, is that we have, like Isaiah stated earlier, the contents, the table of contents, and maybe you can reiterate this, Isaiah, are certainly specified around Terrell's body of work, like the brothers, sisters, and gods among us connects to the brother sister plays. So I would say start with a play that you guys like to read, and then look in the book and see what folks are talking about in that chapter. And the titles in the table of contents help you land on what kinds of things they are talking about in the chapter. So that's what I have to say to you, and I commend you. I just wanted you to know, Corey, really fast, that you are not alone. You know, we see students all the time and they feel so isolated, but this is a sentiment from students across the country. So thank you for asking that question, and yeah, you got it. Yes, Isaiah, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think that that's the right strategy, right? Like start with the works that you're interested in, and then find the chapters that further deepen your understanding of the work. But I also just wanted to say, and Sharrell, you might be able to talk a little bit about this, go to Backstage Pass and really, you know, sort of focus in on what people who have collaborated with Terrell have said about the impact that doing his work has had on them. So somebody like Alana Arenas, who Terrell has known since high school, right? And they are both company members at Steppenwolf. And then when he got his television show, he brought her on. She's now on David Makes Man. She talks about the fact that doing his plays were the first time, and she's an actor, right, in Chicago, been doing lots of work over the time, but doing his plays was the first time where she felt like she had an opportunity to play a role that really connected with her own experience, right? And I think there's a lot of that in Backstage Pass where people are talking about the power of doing the work. And I think that that will be really, really invigorating, energizing for you as young performers, people sort of thinking about how to remake this art form so that it isn't sort of steeped in the kind of anti-Blackness that you're describing.
Thank you. I think one thing that really stuck with me when I was going through Black acting methods that excited me about the Terrell Alvin Mcraney book was the use of rituals, and how in his books there's always some sort of ritual that's being disrupted, and that's kind of what sets off some other like actions. And so that's something that we're looking to explore in spring. So thank you all so much, because this is like gold.
Thank you, Corey, and good luck with that. I see a question. I am wondering if the panel can speak on the celebration of love and intimacy between Black characters in Mcraney's plays, and how can these celebrations of love and intimacy, how can these moments be a healing force and education in the American theater? Thank you, Ann James, for that question. And it's in the chat too. Whoever wants to answer that on the panel.
Well, I'll go first. The thing about that moved me so deeply about his plays, I've seen other of his plays. I haven't seen all of his plays, but he goes to a place of reality. Sometimes they're so real that I can barely stand it. It's so real to me. The depth of emotion that he brings out. And so I think that just the idea that he's bringing these things to the table in the way that he's bringing them, and someone mentioned David Makes Man, and that for me was, I mean, these people do things to each other that they shouldn't do. They say things they shouldn't say. They behave in ways they shouldn't behave, but there's a depth of love there that connects them in a very visceral way. And so I think seeing that takes us past any stereotypical view we might have of the character and takes us into the specificity and reality of that character. I think if you're going to act in these plays, the young man who asked about acting, these plays really stretch you as an actor. And you have to stretch yourself past any kind of, the usual way of doing things, and to get to the reality of that character. So for me, each one of his plays is a lesson. When I go to see his plays, I get an acting lesson, I get a directing lesson, I get a great story. So all of those things are things that help us to grow and to learn. So I just think exposing people to these plays is very helpful in the development of your understanding of the lives that he's putting before us.
Yeah, one of the things that I don't know how we probably should do some raising. I don't know how to do it, Sharrell, but okay. One of the things I found really fascinating is the work always deals with this kind of the larger ecological environment, right? And so you're always finding that people are moving, like it requires a certain type of choreography even of the body, which of course I imagine makes working like on stage very difficult, right? How do you get us to understand, right, when Shango is causing a thunderstorm versus when Oya is creating a rainstorm, right? Like what is the blood, right? Like the blood is that rain or is it dirt, right? Like what kinds of magic is being produced through these kind of symbols. And what I find fascinating, thinking about Corey's question, but also thinking about the question that was asked, what I find is that in the midst of all the debris, these folks come together and not always in harmony. Sometimes it's actually really productive dissonance, right? Like the tensions between them are so productive and so rich and so lifelike, right? Because the life world that Mcraney produces is not one that is really distant from us, right? Right? It is one that feels actually close and distant. And it's something about that that's really beautiful to watch. And it's really beautiful to watch, particularly Black women and Black men on stage doing all types of things with their bodies, responding to the environment.
Can I go ahead?
Yep.
Okay, great. I wanted to answer both questions, and just quickly to Corey and to any other student groups out there. I am happy to speak to anyone for free about the book, to any of your classrooms, and I'm sure that you could find other faculty members, if you needed to find a scholar to speak to your groups, that would also be happy to be of service. So just put that, keep that in mind. To students, Sharrell. And then the other thing I wanted to say, in response to the question from Ann James, is that, I mean, I generally speak in affirmations and think of myself as someone who really tries to put out positive energy into the world. That said, I think I'm also drawn to Terrell's work because the level of vulnerability and the experience of suffering and pain is so authentic, right? It seems to me so unfiltered. And that's not to say it's trapping it in realism necessarily, but in terms of the kind of the feeling of the play seems to me so authentic. And so often these plays are so immersed in just the tragic aspects of life. And the level of suffering is profound. And often that suffering is caused by the people most intimate in their worlds, right? So while there might be opportunities to show love and intimacy, I think that Terrell's not afraid to show the kind of pain people inflict on those in their own communities and worlds. So that's really important for me to say this next point, which I think all the more reason then, when you see these moments of connection and intimacy, especially from people who aren't necessarily affiliated, right, as quote unquote family, right, where they might be strangers or people who are not necessarily in immediate relationship, but forge something out of a sequence of events or that they're living through, their love and affection becomes all the more profound and models a way of being in the world. And I think that the scene that I pulled out from Choir Boy between AJ, you know, the embodiment of heteronormative Black masculinity, and then also then Ferris, who is the effeminate choir boy who has been so beaten and defeated by the other students at the Drew Academy, that AJ, who embodies that like ideal, can then be the one to embrace him and give him love and intimacy and connection and rebuild him, right, uplift him. To me, is I'd never seen that kind of allianship, right, alliedness or whatever the word is, of between two young Black men on stage before. That wasn't about a kind of repressed sexuality or repressed homoerotics. It was about, this is what we do, right? That's what you, and the AJ's line is, that's what you get, right? Like, you get the good stuff too, not just the terrible stuff. And then there's in the new play, and Isaiah has a really beautiful piece in the Performing Arts Journal on Ms. Black for President, which is the latest a collaboration between Terrell, Alvin, Mcraney, Steppenwolf Theater, and Tina Landau, where we see, so Choir Boy models intra-generational intimacy and love, right? And even though there's teachers and there's elders in the play, I think that Ms. Black for President, which tells the story of Terrence Allen Smith, Joan Jett Black, who ran for president as an out drag queen in 1992, and went to New York City to the Democratic National Convention in full drag to kind of overtake the convention and do an intervention there. There's a really beautiful sequence of events between Joan Jett Black and a younger Black gay male who is documenting the Joan Jett Black kind of parade into New York, right? He's a documentarian, and they forged this really tender intergenerational. And again, I don't mean to underplay the sexual erotics, but I think too often when we see two men together, the implicit, explicit, or repressed homoerotics is all that is mentioned. And I think here what Terrell offers is he doesn't desexualize his characters, but he allows for Black gay men to form alliances outside of the sexual economy, like ways to kind of how to be present for each other in loving, intimate friendships. And again, that's something that's not generally in gay theater at large shown either intragenerationally or intergenerationally. So that would be my response to Anne's really great question.
Yeah, I just want to support what David was saying. With one of my favorite moments in Moonlight is when the young boy is being taught to swim by the older character, Mahershala Ali's character, and he's supporting him in the water. And for the first time, the child knows what trust is, and knows what it is to be cared for. And it's a beautiful moment, and it has nothing to do with anybody's sexuality. It just has to do with looking at these people and as this man who would never be thought of in the outside world as a father, and the father figure, as a loving he's a loving partner to his wife, or he is this person. And I think that's where Mcraney just takes us from all of our preconceived notions of these characters and gives us a larger dimension. So I just wanted to support what you were saying.
And it's also, we see it in David Makes Man. There's the friendship between David, and I don't want to give too much away, because if you haven't seen this series, it's one of the best series on TV. It's just extraordinary. And David is the protagonist, and he's living in the projects, and he has just a lot of stuff happening that's very difficult. But he forms a friendship with with two other people in his school, and one of them in particular also has a lot of struggle. And again, I don't want to like give it away, but the friendship there is really beautiful and very powerful, and it comes out of a shared sense of suffering, right, and a recognition of the tragic, and shows how even young people can begin to model being present for each other in caring, loving ways. And again, I find that just extraordinary, both whether it's in the theater, whether it's in films like Moonlight, whether it's in TV like David Makes Man, and even the relationship between David and his, quote unquote, guidance counselor, the great Ruben Santiago Hudson, right, also begins to model, okay, like who can be, and I don't want to say a father to us, right, because that just like, again, prioritizes biological kinship structures over just what it means to be in relationship across generations, regardless, outside of the biological mandate of kinship, right? What are our responsibilities of teachers to students? What are our responsibilities to young people? What are our responsibilities to a younger generation that we see so clearly in pain? What resources do we have, right, to uplift them, right? Even to feed them, because the first thing the Ruben Santiago Hudson character has to do is just give them some food, right? So just like, what is the nourishment that we can offer a generation in pain? And it's just really deep and very powerful representations of love and intimacy.
Can I continue the line of thought, or is that okay?
Yes, that's cool.
I just see another question.
Two more. We're gonna try to get through two more questions, but go ahead and continue.
Oh, so I mean, much of what David and Freda were saying really resonated with me, but I was thinking about the challenge of Mcraney, and I think maybe the question I saw was a question around actual performance, like what is the challenge of performing the work or directing the work. But I also think that the very challenge of directing or acting in the work is the challenge of reading the work as well, which is, are we reading these figures as all human, or are we reading these figures as spirit? And are we reading these figures as maybe a little bit of both, right? And what does it mean to actually rest in the world? And so some of why father or mother or any of these terms, or even gay or queer, any of those things don't really work, is because when we have to move out of the side of the human context, right, they don't make sense in terms of our logics, right? And so like even the notion of reproduction doesn't quite make sense. It's about offering, right? It's about exchange, it's about energy, it's about co-creation, right? And so the language of patriarchy and the language of capitalism and all of these other things kind of get turned on their head when we start investigating these folks as spirit. And how that works on the body is that the body actually can't make choices always that are typical method acting, right? So we're told that the character says, I smile. But it doesn't say, I smile like X, or I smile like B, or I smile like, right? It's like, I smile like Ogun smiles, right? And there's something really, really fresh about that. Isaiah, you know, I quoted you in my piece. I can't remember what you call that, but there's a way in which Isaiah frames it that I really love. But I just wanted to say that it's just something really magical about the combination, or at least the co-creation between the human and the spirit that gets messy, but also makes it hard to act, but also makes it hard to read.
Mm-hmm. Isaiah, did you like to respond to the question about, thank you, Jeffrey, about acting, and how do you as artists approach directing or performing in one of Terrell's plays? I have something to offer, but I wanted to let you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really great question. And I think that, you know, one of the things that's sort of interesting about working on these plays, as Jeffrey said, you really do have to be a close reader of them, but you also have to be flexible as performers in ways that you might not have been in any other project, right? So that you can't sort of approach it formulaically, and precisely because, as Jeffrey was pointing out, and Dr. Freda said this earlier, or touched on this a little bit earlier, the worlds are not worlds that you're familiar with. And in fact, Mcraney sort of sets up, even in the kind of didascalia or the stage directions at the beginning, with the idea of the distant present. That in and of itself lets you know that part of what you are going to be encountering and part of what you're going to be working with is going to be slightly askew. Right? And the question becomes, how do you approach work that forces you to be a little bit off balance? And that requires just really sort of taking it beat by beat, like figuring out each moment and figuring out a way to really, there's an immediacy in the work, right? So that each thing that's being said, when it's being said, it's true. But as our panelists talked about, but you might contradict yourself in the very next moment, and you have to be alive to those kinds of quick juxtapositions, those quick contradictions, and that's really, really hard.
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to offer up something that you know, I'm still reflecting on. I directed In the Red and Brown Water, and what was actually difficult for me is that I needed everybody there all the time. Even though, you know, there are some scenes that you could, you know, in general, you would take one or two characters and work with them. Every time I tried to do that, I needed everybody. And I think that goes back to the spirituality. It goes back to, I feel like community, and how that you are not yourself without the other person. And Terrell really does a great job to connect characters in his plays in different kind of ways. And so I had to throw, you know, my how I'm used to directing a little bit to the side and explain to the cast. I thought I was going to be able to do, what's the word? I forgot it, where you, I forgot the word, but I thought I was going to be able to separate you guys. And I was like, nope, everybody got to be here the whole rehearsal time. And once we started doing that, they understood, like, oh, this is why I need to be here, because I'm also connected to this particular God, maybe, if you're looking at the brother-sister plays. And it also reminds me of Once on This Island in a little bit, you know, the way the gods are kind of controlling it and they're always together. It feels very much like that, and it felt very much like that for me. So that's something I can offer up, is that it is certainly ensemble work. It feels nobody is a part, because you're really telling a story. And he goes in and out of that too. It's almost like, how much are you really in character? How much are you yourself? You really have to bring yourself to the text when you're working with Terrell Alvin Mcraney, because he slides, I think, against those lines, you know, of reality and not reality, of grounded earth, and then of the atmosphere. And I think that's what Isaiah was talking to as well earlier. So everybody got to be there for me. I think we could do one more question. I'm looking. Does anybody want to unmute? We can have one more question if anybody wants to unmute. Thank you guys for staying. I see it's a lot of folks still on.
I have a question, one more if I'm allowed. Oh, go ahead. You answer it. Yeah.
Okay, we can do the person who just was talking, and then we can come to Narissa. That's fine too.
Oh, okay. It's Corey again. Hi. I was just gonna ask, because I know everyone shared their stories about how they came to Terrell Alvin Mcraney's work. I want to ask why this playwright and why now? As opposed to some of the other like big, as opposed to Katori Hall, Dominique Morceau, Lori Parks.
You know what? Oh, no, go ahead, David. Did you want to?
No, I'm just wondering, like any one of us should address that. We could all say something, yeah.
I was going to say something really quick, and I hope I'm not stepping on toes. But, you know, a lot of times Black playwrights are vetted by white people. White theater people, you know, they decide that this playwright is amazing, and then their plays are being produced everywhere. That's fine. Not, you know, well, not that it. When I read I'm saying their opinion about it, that's their opinion. When I read Terrell's work, this is just for me, I was like, oh, he is good. You know what I mean? And that's just a real honest answer. And I'm not talking about any other Black playwrights out there. I think there's some fantastic, of course, other playwrights we could talk about. But to me, Terrell, I always say, is doing what I feel like we can go back to William Shakespeare. Usually playwrights, I feel like, that get into the public sphere, they have 1, 2, or 3 really fantastic pieces. Terrell, most of his pieces are just brilliant, right? And I think Lynn Nottage is coming up on that as well. But that's also why I feel like for me, Terrell now is that not only does he produce a play, but 9 times out of 10, the play gonna be really good. And he's really flexible, you know? So that's my response to that.
And my response would be just the fact that the 3 of us were able to be in conversation and be totally enthusiastic was already suggesting that the scholarly, academic, university, you know, theater community could, how do I phrase this? Terrell is about building communities, right? And I think this is a plug for Thursday, right? So what Sharrell has organized for Thursday with all the various directors and artists who are involved with that, they're all part of a conversation that Terrell has started and is continuing and is inviting other people into. And I think then Sharrell, Isaiah, and I, in conversation and with other scholars, and this is where Freda and Jeffrey come in, and Kathy and other people, we just thought, like, we're also in conversation with the work, right? So let's have those conversations that we were having in the halls or in conferences or amongst each other. Let's mobilize that, create a space for that, and then empower younger scholars, scholars of color, because we're all scholars, I'm Latinx, all scholars of color, to do something that kind of moves the conversations that Terrell's having in the theater, moving that conversation into higher education, into academic life. So I think part of my project was to go on board with Terrell's project. Okay, like, let's get people in the conversation.
The thing that I'll just add really quickly is that the hope is that a project like this, which builds on lots of other projects like a lot of the books that focus on August Wilson's work or Susan Lori Parks's work or Lynn Nottage's work, will then encourage folks to go out and put together projects on Dominique Morisseau, right? To make sure that, because there was a move away at a certain point from doing these kinds of projects. And part of what we're trying to say is it's useful, it's worthwhile to have a book that engages very deeply and very seriously and very thoughtfully and creatively with the body of work of a single playwright. And particularly when it comes to African-American playwrights, right? There's this sense that somehow, you know, there can only be one who is ordained at a time. But we know that right now, as David sort of talked about earlier in his presentation, we are in the midst of a moment where there is fecundity, right? And we really want to be spending time really thinking about all the rich contributions of these playwrights. And we need more of these books. There shouldn't just be one book on Terrell Alvin Mcraney. I'm looking forward to there being 10 at some point. This is the beginning of a conversation, to echo what David was saying.
But to go back, I just want to go back to the original question. All of the playwrights that you mentioned, Corey, have wonderful things to offer. But for me, about Terrell, Alvin, Mcraney is I could either just enjoy the work as it stood and not think it passed into other things, or I can decide that I want to dig into it further and find other dimensions in it to explore. There's just so much to explore in his work. So many potential avenues for your thoughts to go down. And also, I loved the visceral emotional responses that it elicited from me, which doesn't always happen in the theater. It's what I love about theater, when I'm carried away by something. And I got carried away by his work. So that's something special about what he does and the way he does it. And as a teacher, I could go into the classroom and I could give, 25 or 30 students, I can give them each a different assignment and say, present this about it, present that, present this. And we would have a vibrant, multi-dimensional conversation. So that's what I love about Mcraney's work.
And did Narissa have a question? Were we going to get to her?
Narissa, are you still there?
There she is.
Awesome.
I am. Hi.
Hi, Narissa. Welcome.
Hi. So the answer that was just given by, I want to call you by your right title, Professor Giles, Dr. Giles?
Yeah, Freda.
Yes, Freda Giles, okay. So I am a teacher as well. And what I'm concerned about is the pre-work, right? So I'm excited about diving into this book personally, right? But now I'm going to want to step in the work in front of some talented and brilliant teens. So what would you suggest to be maybe the work before this work? What would be something that I could approach that with? So if it's a book, if it's a play, what would be the work before us diving into this? Because this is a unit. This is a 9-week unit for me. So what's the work before the work is what my question is. And thank you for your time, everyone.
I think, so I'll take a little stab at this for you, Narissa. I really appreciate the question because, and I don't teach high school. I used to teach high school, but I do teach a 13-year-old every day. And my 13-year-old has read The Brother Size. And honestly, sometimes I know 9 weeks is a lot, actually. I don't take 9 weeks. Probably we read it in 2 weeks. But the first stab was him just doing it. I was like, you read it, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And he had to like come to it with all of his stuff, right? And his reading. He was like, I don't get the why are they all together saying rough and hard? I don't get why is the road rough and I can't see the road? Like, I don't know. Like, he's not watching a movie, right? So he's like, what road is rough? I guess he's talking about life. Like, this reminds me of the Bible when they say 2 roads or something like that. Is this something like that, Dad? I'm like, yeah, now you're getting it. Let's go with this, right? Mm-hmm. But it requires some patience with the children. And as does with college students, to be quite honest, I don't know anybody who just, or even us, right? Like I read Brother Size probably 12 times, right? Before I even picked up a pen to just try to be like, ooh, and I think that part of it is making it fun for them. The one thing I will say is they can't not perform it, and you cannot not think about imaginative ways in which you might use music, right? It can't just be dry.
That was my other question.
People want to do it dry. I'm like, don't do this dry. do some funky stuff with some music, bring in some Kendrick Lamar. We're gonna be all right at some point. Like, try different things that would, make it a richer experience for them. So that's what I would say.
And if I could add some of the pre-work that you might want to have your students consider is just go to the websites of the theater that produced the work. So Steppenwolf, for example, or Berkeley Rep, or the Studio Theater in DC, all of them have educational components to basically all of their productions. But Terrell's work at Steppenwolf does have an educational component that you could tap into that I think is geared for high schoolers. And they even have, I think some of these, I don't know, outside of Steppenwolf, but they would have actual performances for students. We do that here in LA at the Mark Taper and at various other regional theaters too. But Narissa, where are you?
Like literally like a half an hour away from New World.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so his name is like, so we've talked about it. There's students that are graduating our program who are going into New World. So, like the whole, there's the whole thing. And so this book is like,
also tap into Sharrell's chronology and see where the plays had original productions, and they would probably on their websites be able to guide you.
Yes,
educational.
Thank you. So thank you for this book, by the way. So we in Florida appreciate you. So yes.
Well,
we surely do. We surely do.
Yes. I think we are good. What is amazing, remember that Dr. David Roman has offered to come into the class. And also Kathy Nye has offered to come into the class. And so we dropped their emails as well in the chat. And you guys have been amazing. Thank you so much to the panelists. Dr. Freda and Dr. Jeffrey, thank you for joining us. Thank you for writing terrific chapters. Thank you to everybody in the book for coming together. And Isaiah, I appreciate that point you made as well about we definitely need more books on Terrell, and we need a whole bunch more anthologies on all of these other fantastic, terrific writers. You guys have been amazing. We hope to see y'all tomorrow and Thursday. So sign up now, catch us on Instagram, on Facebook. We're around. Let's stay connected. Hey, Deron. I didn't know Deron was on. Hey, Deron.
Sharrell, can I just say one thing really quickly?
Sure thing.
I just want to say, if you do purchase the book on Amazon, and that's your business, as Tabitha Brown might say, please do rate it on Amazon. Putting 5 stars up there will help ensure that it is really circulating. So we just ask that if you do purchase on Amazon and you really enjoy it, if you find that it's a really valuable teaching resource, teaching tool for you, go ahead and put a 5-star rating on that. We greatly appreciate it.
Yes. All right, all minds and bodies clear. Panel, y'all good?
Thank you, Sharrell.
Thank you, Sharrell.
Thank you. We'll be in touch. Okay, everybody, good night. Take care. Thank you so much, guys. Bye-bye, everybody.